Hello, hey, hi, it is I, Dr. Beep Boop, and I'm coming to you today with an episode about a show I saw in March of 2024. So a little bit after the other shows that are the end of 2023-ish. Um, it is Frontline Assembly, Gary Numan, and Ministry. Yeah. And I say it like that, Ministry, is because at that time, this was a landmark show for me because I'd never seen any of these bands live at that time. Yeah. All that time I had to see these bands and I didn't. But I think also because I'm in my hometown again, I am like now finally seeing like the clouds open up a little bit. I'm seeing that I might be able to like escape for a little bit again. If you're probably thinking about where I'm going, you're probably right. You're probably right. But if you've learned anything about me, either because you've been reading the Substack for a while or listening to this podcast, then you'll know that there is a part of me that has become a little unpredictable. A little unpredictable. You can predict how I'm going to behave in the relationships I have, the friendships. You can typically predict how I'm going to behave there based on past behavior. But even that has changed. But what I will say is that it's become a thing where people they don't know where I am. Like, where are you? Now the past year that has sort of solidified the fact that I'm constantly in Daytona. Like, and I'm so done. It's not that I dislike my hometown. The things I'm about to talk about on this episode indicate that I definitely don't hate my hometown. It's just, see, it's not the place where I grew up. It's not that place. It is a different place. What it has become is following the economic collapse that happened when MTV finally pulls out, a number of things happen. And, the economy here that had depended so much on tourism fell because there were a bunch of people here who were racist and old. I know it sounds terrible. It sounds terrible, but I want to also make sure that when I say people who are old, I'm not talking about my dad. I'm not talking about my gorgeous aunt who is 83 and honestly looks maybe 55. Seriously, my aunt is just stunning, and she is, for me, she's just the classiest woman ever, and I always loved that about her. And luckily when I got to a certain age, I was able to learn from her, and I was able to, get like my first decent haircut, because of her. So and I'm not talking about them. I might not even be talking about your cool grandpa. But what I am saying is that the people that were here, that I'm saying because of the racist old people, what I'm saying is that they ran MTV and Black College Reunion and all these things out of this town because, again, racist and old. And I don't think they understood just how bad the economy here was going to drop into a flippin' toilet. I don't think they realized it because all of the things that they wanted gone, they wanted MTV out, they wanted trashed, drunk college students out, they wanted all these things out. They got other things. They got other things in the economic collapse of this town. I'm saying it. If any of my high school friends listen to this, half of them are like, how dare she? Maybe because they're still here. And the other half are like, girl, you are right. You are right. So the reason though Daytona Beach once again comes into focus is that my foundational years were the 80s and the 90s. Those are foundational years to my music taste. There's a thing where it's like when you are a teenager, you're listening to 20-year-olds create the music genre that is now where you grew up. It's like, you don't understand, like it's an odd dynamic. This is why it's like, you're a band, just think twice before you're mingling with your fans, right? Because now, Ronan Farrow is everywhere. But I think what's important to know about Daytona Beach is this, and it does matter when I get into something that happened in high school, and this part of it, and part of understanding me, understanding what I was like as a teenager, which is just, I am sure that if you know me now, you're like, oh my God, I never thought about that. What was she like as a teenager? I was a hellion, okay? I was a hellion, but also kind of fragile, emotionally fucked up because of the things that I'm talking about in another podcast I have. All right. So something that I think people miss when they're talking or they're talking about Daytona Beach or they're referencing it, is that it wasn't all just debauchery. There was a lot of it, but the music culture here was incredible. It was. I'm just going to say it because you have to think of what Florida was like at the time. So what we had at the time was Latin freestyle. Ooh, Florida loved Latin freestyle. We loved Latin freestyle. I feel like, well, everybody did, not like we did. Not like us, not like us. Nope. It was essential to us. Like, what do you mean no Latin freestyle? Get out of my face. We loved it. We loved also the fact that it was kind of imperfect. If you are listening to people like Stacey Q, maybe Expose, stuff like that, and you go back and you listen, you're like, wow, the vocal production, these things, it's not perfect. I'm like, right. That's because Latin freestyle was more of an immediate culture, right? It was the gloriousness of that time was that you could take your synthesizers to somebody's house, do a party, and then just sort of throw down some extra. You could do that. Okay, so there was a huge punk presence here. There was a lot of music here, period. And the thing is that because of the way our lives were here at the time, there wasn't a way for someone like me to recognize fascism when it's right in front of my face. Not in high school. I learned that in college, which is probably why they didn't want me teaching these things. But at the time, considering the way that we lived through, the way that we lived through music, and as I began to learn later about subcultures, given that we were so diverse, and trust me, I spent a lot of time going to different states at that time. My father was big on making sure we hit the road, and I didn't find that many places that I would have been able to say are as diverse as Florida was, but also understand that this is not, I had not gone to DC, New York City, right? So in my brain, I would have been like, what do you mean? Like, we are? This is going to be the, what? But here is something I didn't know. That is that this state was number one at one point for Klan activity. Martin Luther King came down to Florida and he stopped in St. Augustine. Understand, St. Augustine's like maybe an hour from where I'm living. He stopped in that town and said, this is the most lawless city I've ever been to. And I mean, from, just from looking over the things that he said, it was kind of a vibe where he shows up and he's like, I can't help these people. Martin Luther King said, I can't do anything about this. That says a lot. When Martin Luther King says this is a lawless city, that says a lot. And here's the thing, though. If you told a bunch of us, and when I'm saying a bunch of us, I'm talking about an interesting cross-section of diverse kids. Like if you had told us, if you had just pulled back the veil to some of this in order to create much more lively debate, more lively conversation on these topics. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Um, we were the first honey bears, right? If we learned the details we now know about this state, we would have lost our goddamn minds. We would have lost our minds on these people. I think if we support the music cultures here in Daytona, that it could return to a semblance of what it once was. Something about this town that you might not know is that it had a deep, it had a rich musical culture before MTV showed up here. The sand is why people were here. It's very tightly packed. You can drive a car on it. That's what that should do. If you do a little Google foo, you should know then that this is also the reason the Daytona 500 and all of that is here, is because of the aforementioned sand. This was an area for the very wealthy at one point. Look up Flagler family and you'll start to see, oh God, this place was filthy, stinking rich. Yeah, and you know who else was? My grandfather. My mother's father. That man was filthy, stinking rich, and then we lost it all. But my point here is that old Florida had a lot of money. Old Florida smacks up against the fact that Disney pops down in the 60s. NASA has also done so. NASA has also done so. And so now people who would be a little bit more mainstreamy culture, their eyes start looking at Florida, at Daytona Beach. A bunch of older people who are like, I want to come down here and be my snowbird self, but we've got this going on. This is ridiculous. I don't want Polly Shore running around our town. We don't want this man wheezing the juice in our 7-Elevens, okay? And it's, yeah. So what I'm getting at here is this. All of these cultures were a mishmash here. If you watched MTV, you probably did if you're Gen X. If you did, then you should know that our town, our lunch tables were divided among what TV show, what show you watched on MTV. If you're like, oh yeah, if you walked up to somebody, you're like, hey, what show you watch? What we meant is which MTV show, 120 minutes. If somebody's like 120 minutes, we're like, ooh, I would have been like, ooh, nice. That's mine, right? That's goth subculture. That would include some industrial. It was like alternative culture. And when progressive and alternative meant something, right? Or you might be somebody who was very into Latin culture. You loved your Latin freestyle. That's me as well. Maybe you were here, you love the Rock and Ranch, you love the country music connection that people had here. Not me. Not me. But that has changed. That has changed. But what I'm getting at is that I was in the 80s when Ministry sort of blows up into the band that they became. I was there for that click over between liking the old stuff and then hearing the new stuff and being like, okay, I can do this too. So that will come into play in just a moment. So just you just gotta trust that when we start talking about me in high school, yeah, gonna have to throw out what you know about me, I think. But in March of 2024, when I went to see Frontline Assembly, Gary Numan in Ministry, I was thrilled to be there for this lineup, especially given that one of my friends, Best, a name you've already heard, you will hear again. And I only put her in when it's necessary, right? Or whenever it's part of the story enough. But I've known her for almost 30 years. It's right up there, almost 30 years. But I think Frontline Assembly was one of her favorite bands, if not her favorite for many years in her youth, right? But I'd never seen any of these really important bands. I had never seen any of these acts because my education in my 20s, my incredible, just awful anxiety or my illness Also, the years that I was ill were the years that I was more involved in the local music culture in Orlando, which is a series now on the Substack. And remember, anything I talk about on this podcast has likely been written about. I've likely written about it on the Substack before. On the Substack, you also get the photos and videos that you don't, right? You don't get if you are just listening to the podcast, right? But Frontline Assembly opened the whole show that night, and we were running late. We went to go eat dinner. We went to eat dinner, and during the dinner, it was like taking forever because this was at Hard Rock Live. So we were seated at Hard Rock Cafe, and it's kind of like if you go to a restaurant before you go to a show, you can't control when you get the bill, which is why this is why I never do it. I never go to a show. I never go to dinner before a show, but we did this night. And we were running late, and Best for sure was not going to miss Frontline Assembly. And if you know me, then you know it's like don't go to a show with B and expect that you're going to run in right before the band starts playing, skip the opener, and be chaotic about it. No. I did not want to miss Frontline Assembly. You can't predict. I couldn't have predicted in 2024 that I was going to see Frontline Assembly in 2025. Like I could not have predicted that. And I did. I did see Frontline Assembly in 2025. So yay. That means that I'll have 2 sets to write about when I write about the Frontline Assembly show. But as for today, because we missed almost the first song, I think almost the first whole song, we were also stressed out. I was stressed out. If you have seen me stressed out at a show, you know all you need to do. You don't even have to ask. Just go get a cider. I'm allergic to beer. Go get a cider. Hand it to me. Say, have you had a drink? And if I say no, get me a cider and put it in my hand. And I will be happy. But this time, since we're late, we run up. We're not missing Frontline Assembly. We get to a place where we can't push any further forward. Everybody's, tightly packed around this. So we're standing there and we're looking over at the bar. I'm like, the bar's there. I need a drink. We're stressed out, but you can't move because if you do, you're going to wind up all the way in the back. We already weren't, close to the front. If you know me, you're like, oh boy, do not create chaos for Beep before a show. Just don't do it. And if you love me and you want to be at a show, you will protect my time at the show, right? So, and I'll love you endlessly for it. If you want to get on my good side, that's what you'll do. You'll make my show experience easier. Honestly, it's fine. But that night, we were standing there and I was not going to move. So I was going to stay stressed out. So we're standing there and because we missed the first show and stressed out, it felt to me like Frontline Assembly sort of passed before I had an opportunity to fully register what I was experiencing. But luckily, as I said, I saw them in 2025. So I will be able to write about Frontline Assembly in the future. Especially since I've seen them twice. At the end of the Frontline Assembly set, it was that moment where getting there stressed us out, but moving to go get a drink seemed like we'd lose our spot at an important show. I think we stayed out, but she'll likely correct me. She also probably has much better photos and videos from this set than I do. So we're going to have to move into Gary Numan's set. Now, I'm just going to say right out of the gate, I want to point out that Gary Numan is now 67 years old. If you're like, and so? That's because you've probably never seen him live, right? Because if you've seen Gary Numan live and you remember that the man is 67 years old, those two things won't, you'll be watching him thinking, what on earth I mean, this wouldn't be of any note if he hadn't been running around that stage like he's a very healthy 40-year-old. It was a lot, but in a good way. And again, there are photos and videos, on the Substack that show him running around. I was super excited to finally see Numan, though I'm like lots of fans who like cars. I know it was a thing he went through for a period of time where he was just like, ugh, not cars. Like, why? That is not how I see myself as an artist. But then he moved into thinking, you know what? They love this song. They love this song. I'm going to play it for them. And when you listen to the song, the problem is that you don't have a context for that song. Like what he was doing when he wrote that song was some really interesting effects that if you're younger, you might just take them for granted because they were influential. Like some of the processing with the vocals, like there was a lot going on in that song that made it not only very catchy but a new sound. I think something that younger people don't get to experience or didn't get to experience is how revolutionary electronic sounds really were in the 80s, right? Like how revolutionary they were, because you have to imagine that somebody introduces to you an entirely new instrument, like an entirely new instrument that can also process, right? So synthesizers, computers to synthesizers, it was revolutionary. And so a lot of the sounds that you're likely accustomed to hearing were new relatively for Gen X. I was born in 75, so I was, in 80 in the 80s I would have been as old as 14 years old. Foundational time, right? I was excited to hear Cars live. I wanted to hear it live, and I don't care. You'll find that something about me is that I've gotten to a point in life where I just don't care what people think of my music taste. I don't think anybody has pointed at me and saying you have bad music taste. I have a taste for exploration is what I have. And I think I will talk about why at the end of this episode. What was it that growing up in Daytona Beach, listening to this kind of music, learning about electronic sounds, hearing cars, this kind of music, the cross section, like how did that form? I'm going to talk about that at the end of this episode because I think it's interesting. It also says kind of what I'm about. So it was kind of, he was kind of annoyed at some point, which I understand if you evolved and aren't in love with that part of your career, but I'm still down to play that in my car for sure. I think he perfected that look of, quote, like, goth dude needs to sweat and run around without compromising the look. I think that's what he had going on. He also just sounds really good live. And that's the most important part of his show, obviously. But I see some older acts come through without this level of energy. Yeah, he sounded great. The audience loved him. And he ran around. Like, I was not registering his age until that night. I had to stop and be like, this was after the show. It's like, wait a minute. Like, wait, how old is he? And Bess was like, we looking it up, 67. What? What? And there was a very cute joke about, do you think he's EB? Because he's a little bit shorter, I think, than a little bit shorter than a lot of people think he is, just sort of kind of a small dude. But that's also a joke that I'm not going to like derail the rest of this piece about. But so during the show, I had turned to Bess and I was like, hey, I started a mini mosh to this Ministry song in high school. And that's the part of the Ministry set that involves high school. But to just reiterate a few points, Florida had been dealing with the challenges from the alt-right for years prior, but the choices Governor DeSantis was becoming increasingly harsh about were his already harsh agenda. I mean, he already had a harsh agenda. I was expecting someone to drag Governor DeSantis, and I was not disappointed In Florida, over the past like 3-4 years, if you are part of any kind of alternative subculture, right? If you are, then your favorite musicians, if they chose to play, because there were some musicians who said, no, I'm not going down there. But they'd be like, I'm not going down there. But then other bands would be like, why not? We're not playing for the jerk faces that are passing these awful laws. We're playing for the people in our subculture. And whoop, came right down. But of course, that meant that there was going to be some statements about DeSantis. And here's the thing. I was a lecturer in that crowd. Like, please do. Please. I was the kind of my career had me front and center for the alt-right show in Florida. Yeah, like it. Yes, that was not a show I wanted to be front row to, but I had a responsibility to it. But it exhausted me, and that is sort of where this is headed at this point. So at the end of 2023, I'm seeing these really interesting shows. But by March of 2024, it's only been a handful of months. I'm becoming tired. I am becoming a woman who needs a break, who can't seem to find a break. I could not seem to get a break. So I had driven down. I was up in Nashville a bit, or in Tennessee a bit, and then I would just come home and I'd be home. But then I'd go up there, so it was sort of back and forth. I was doing everything I could sort of like legally according to like where I was living. But this got worse, obviously. Like, look where we are today on February 16th, 2026. Look where we are today. To say that it got worse is just, I don't even have the words for it. But the lesson there for me was to not complain, because things could definitely get worse. But I wasn't disappointed, because of course Jourgensen was gonna say some shit. I was so happy about it, but we know it's worse right now, but that's part of a national issue and not as concentrated as issues in Florida anymore. Like it's wider. Plus Floridians were already exhausted. Some English lecturers felt downright loopy. That's me. I was loopy from years of this conflict. For those who aren't accustomed, or for those of you who aren't acquainted with the way that this went down, is that it started to go down long before anybody else outside of Florida knew about it. Teachers were sort of quiet about it, or at least I should say, lecturers, professors, higher education, teachers in higher education were a lot quieter about it, because we had our nose to the grindstone, because we could see what was happening. And I think it might have been Bill 266, that on that bill, what they sort of snuck in was a provision that said students can record us at any time. And to most people, they'd be like, why are you so upset about that? And if I said bodily autonomy, right, there would still be a pushback. They'd be like, but don't students do that anyway? And I'm like, yes, but they have to ask. And I think I grew tired of this. There were a lot of people, including people I lived with at one point, who would just be like, well, if you don't like it, do something about it. And I just look at them like, do you have any idea what I'm doing all day? Like, do you know what I'm doing? And people didn't. So it was the way that I was frustrated in March of 2024 is very different than the way that I would say I'm frustrated today. At that time, it was like, we couldn't quite get everyone to understand the magnitude of things because it was early. And that's the other thing we tried to say is, y'all, do y'all realize this is early. But they typically, whenever they pass a law like that, they pass a bill and it says that students don't have to ask you anymore for you to record them, for them to record you, right? They don't have to ask you anymore. That means that the next thing they want to do is make something that you do or say illegal or questionable, or something that could ruin your university's funding, which matters. It matters, right? So if they do that, we were saying, do you not understand? But the thing was, no, people didn't. They thought that we really were complaining about things. But that's the way that a lot of bills pass, especially when it comes to stuff like higher education, that fewer people care about on the daily, or at least did on the daily. So we would say they only are going to pass that kind of law if they want to make it so that there is an open legal path for students to record us if we say something in a classroom that they don't like. And that's how this would work. Let's just be real. That's how this would work. But that was happening in like, ooh, if that passed in like 2022 or 2023, we were discussing it as early as 2021 following Floyd. But let's keep moving on this particular path, right? But that's why I was exhausted. But I was happy to be in the audience for this particular thrashing, as Jourgensen dragged him moments after taking the stage. Like, Al Jourgensen gets up, walks up, and he just immediately takes a microphone, and it's like within minutes, dragging DeSantis. We're like, yes. He had to have known that a lot of us in that room wanted it. Now, there are also some interesting photos I took of ministry that night, and one of them is like Al Jourgensen. Look at the photo. Al Jourgensen looks like he doesn't have any bones in his arms, like the way they're hanging. It's just a funny photo. I think I will use this photo as the cover photo for this podcast episode, because he looks like he has no bones in his arms. So within minutes of hitting the stage, without knowing what his exact words were, it was distilled into a growl saying "fuck DeSantis." I mean, I'm saying that though because it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me as an English lecturer anymore. And I think that if I were to say, give me a narrative of 2023 to 2024, give me a narrative of season 1, and I'm going to say we moved from my personal losing everything, personal collapse, to exhaustion, complete exhaustion, trying to recover from all of that while still trying to teach at a public university in the most controversial state at the time. It's not now, but it definitely was it was the moment when I realized that the thing I had been privately fighting for years at this point, in rooms of educated people, trying to zoom into hearings, of bills, speeches people are giving, like, this was a time. So not only was I sick and like recovering from that illness, if I wasn't sick anymore, I was recovering it, but this was definitely beginning to happen when I was still sick. By this time, in March of 2024, I feel done, right? Like, I felt like I didn't have any more in me. And so, to some degree, when Jourgensen comes out, he takes a microphone and he says, "Fuck DeSantis," and then everybody's like, "Oh, yeah," it felt, how do I describe this? It felt kind of crazy, because it was like, oh my God, like, this is now fully solidified in the public's fight. But I think even at this time, I don't think people still at the time realized just how bad it was going to get. Like, look around you. I could say that a lot of people, understandably, did not think that it was going to look like this. But here's the awful part that sounds like a crappy thing to say, and that is, we thought that this was a really, really, a truly possible manifestation of the fascism that was already in the United States. And people, how dare you say that about the United States? But the people who aren't saying that are probably a lot of Black people aren't saying it, because Fascism was always here. Now, as an early Americanist, and right, I have to add this. I'm sorry. As an early Americanist and an early modernist. So early modernism for me is like, okay, so think Renaissance England, but then also include Spain and France. And what we had at that time is, oh, this is the Protestant Reformation. These are the things, these are sort of the influences that drove a bunch of crappy Europeans to come to the land that we now refer to as the as the Americas. Yeah. Yeah, so I did that because I wanted to be able to substantially say, no, we didn't establish this on freedom of religion. In fact, it was quite possibly the opposite. And I was able to have that conversation because I did that research. But then I'm still an early Americanist by focus. So I have, I went for all this time since the late 90s, understanding the true nature of enslavement, obviously from, a Gen X white woman, right? Right. Just saying, I'm just making sure that everybody knows that I'm aware of that. But I was exhausted, but it's also like, imagine this, like, that you're exhausted and that you are having this moment. It's March of 2024. You feel like you're going to collapse. You're stressed out. You go to this show and a lead in one of your foundational bands takes the microphone and says, fuck the guy that is fucking this English teacher over, right? Like, that's what you have to imagine. That's what I'm trying to work toward in this point. Like, that's what it felt like. I'm stressed. I've lost everything. Oh, no, I hadn't lost everything yet. There was more to lose, but that is another like conversation to have another time. But yeah, you've got to understand how that would feel, right? If you've never had a battle that has exhausted you, you're in the crosshairs, and I was, right? Because you think, okay, so this is what Beep was doing. She was an early Americanist. She was educating herself and others on the nature of enslavement and like, yeah, women's issues. All of this is the stuff that I did. I'm also a critical theorist. Like, if you thought that it just couldn't get worse, guess what? It can. So there's a moment, right? And I sort of expected to hear something. I just didn't expect it to be that soon, that focused, and for everybody in that room to just rip into a pit. Like, I wasn't expecting that, but I loved it. I needed it so bad. The whole day, I was just like, that. But it makes you feel seen, even if they have no idea they have no idea I'm there. Why would they know? Like, why would they care? But I'm just saying that's what it felt like. I was like, that's right. That's right. That's right. Mr. Jourgensen, you rip him a new one. But one of the parts of seeing a band that's been important to you for nearly 30 years is that you have so many memories of their songs. And so in addition to this context, right? So in this context where I'm thinking about all this stuff about DeSantis. I'm thinking about Daytona Beach when this is the stuff that's swimming around in my head. So NWO will always be the song I remember, especially because, well, I was in an AV class at my high school and I dipped into the studio space and I blasted this song. It's funny, like I will try to maybe in the show notes or something, I'll find a place where I can drop in a photo of what I looked like in high school, because you would not have been like, oh, she loves industrial and she loves industrial and ministries, harder stuff, you would not look at me and be like, that girl is going to go into the AV room and she's going to blast, NWO on the speakers and start a mosh pit in her AV class. Like, that's not what you're thinking when you're looking at me at that time. That's not what you're thinking. But the rest of the class started a little mosh too in the stage area in that room. It's a wonder the teacher didn't stop that, but it was likely entertaining for him. I have since learned, I have learned that the AV teacher, this is terrible. It's terrible, but I just want everyone to know, let's not like lose our minds over this. Is it problematic? Yes. Yes. But the AV teacher, for those who are like, what's AV? It's audiovisual. This was TV, video, all this stuff, right? And it should make sense to you now. You're like, oh my God, that's another texture to beat. She started doing this when she was young. And it was like, not really. It was more of an interest, but it didn't start to come into play until they handed me here, have a phone that has a camera. And then every single Gen X person was like, the music video dreams, But so, yeah, I did that. Started a little mosh pit in the class. But I learned that the AV teacher during this time, like during this day, we're having this stuff, and I did this more than once where I put something on and created chaos. Ha 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 ha, agent of chaos. But it was either this day or another day when a similar thing happened. That I had run out into like the TV space where the little stage was and everybody's like jumping around or whatever. And I go out there and apparently I put like my butt toward the camera. Now, I have a thing, or at least when I was a teenager, I had this thing where once I found a pair of pants, you were not going to take those pairs. You're not going to take that pair of pants from me. If you know about my Disturbia striped trousers, you're like, yes. The difference, though, is that these jeans no longer fit. Like the thing was, apparently he like zoomed in a little bit, like what the, and they were so tight that my jeans were just so tight that they looked painted on. Now, might also help to know that the teacher was like, I don't even know if the AV teacher was even done with college at this point. So this was a young guy, but still, ew. But it kind of cracks me up because that's kind of what it was like. I would have worn like crazy tight jeans because I just did not want to let go of my favorite jeans, even if they didn't fit the same. That's what I was like. That's the autism part of this program. I'm surprised the AV teacher didn't stop that. But to tell you the truth, he probably thought that made his week. But I told Best that, like during the show, I was like, I started a mosh pit in the classroom. And I think even she gets confused about who I was, right? Like if you met me in the 90s, then, the way I looked at that time, I was not like much of an outward. It wasn't, I don't think I presented in the way that I really felt. I was kind of a label person. And at the time, when, in the 90s, late 90s in college, at the time, the thing was like, oh, she's working classes, so she's overcompensating. What I understand now is that those were the clothes that had the fabrics that didn't make me want to break things. Yeah, that's a corner of being autistic, right? So, Blackwell, my friend Blackwell, those things go right by her now because she knows I'm evil. She knows I'm evil. She knows that there is a little agent of chaos in there, and she thinks it's adorable because it's not really evil. Just, there's just a little agent of chaos. But she knows I'm low-key sinister when I act a little crazy and do my autistic cricket feet thing like I do. But nothing really surprises her because your contradiction isn't a contradiction to Blackwell. God, I love her. As an unsurprising pit started. I mean, I guess it was, but I think it just felt especially charged in the context of Jourgensen, like ripping DeSantis, right? You're like, yes. Everybody's like, get this out of my system. It was especially charged, and I managed to get some of that. I will always get a video of the pit from afar. I am committed to getting a video of the pit if I can. I don't know why. I just love it. It's like this swirling area of the floor. And, inevitably in half the shows that I go to where there is a pit, the guys in it, because it's mostly guys, the guys in it are the same guys that if I said, and I've mentioned this before in a piece, I think it might have been a Nation of Language piece or the last piece when I was talking about the dudes in a line. Men at the shows that I go to are these perfect creatures because one of these guys, he's like, that's right, fuck this governor, because he's likely queer on some level, or or just not a mainstream dude, and he's out there and he's like, yeah, and he looks really badass because he's about to like punch people or whatever. That's what he looks like. But if I were to say, hey babe, if I was dating one, hey babe, there's a brand new Star Wars figurine, this is the guy that would be like, what? And immediately exit the mosh pit and turn into like a 12-year-old kid, in that excited sense, like, where? How much is it? When is it being released? Where can I stand in line? But I love that so much. And those are the people that I want to be angry about this, right? Like, that's right. That's right. I sort of the flash in the video of the pit I took, unfortunately, it's like it creates less of an enjoyable view of the pit, but it's there. So I should mention that I have a tendency to take these weird videos of my face during a show, and I got to be honest, I have no idea why I started this. I think what I was trying to do, and this is like, if I think back over my shows, when I think back over my presence at shows, sometimes a show is overwhelming to me. And so I've mentioned this before, where it sort of grew out of me feeling like overwhelmed and then using the phone on, the camera on the phone as a lens to look through and be like, oh, this is better. And it was an interesting way because it could be like, I can still watch it, but I'm not as overwhelmed. Yeah, that's what I'm going to keep doing. That's what I'm going to do. But then it became also like, ooh, that's kind of a bit much, right? And so it's like weird. I still want to record some of the band that's playing. And then it allows me to do like this weird moment of like, I don't know, peekaboo with whoever it is watching the video. So I know that a lot of people have seen me do those and that nobody asks. Nobody asks what I'm doing. Like, what is that? And it's weird. It is weird. I imagine that after saying this, somebody's going to approach me and be like, Beep, I wanted to know why you did that. It's weird. I do know that now, 2026, I do it when I want to record something I don't want to look at, right? But yeah, you have to be comfortable with your face if you're going to do any of the things that I do. But yeah, so I think I got more photos and videos than I included on the piece in the Substack, but there are the ones I have there are the best of a show where I could have gotten more than I did. I could have, but I was enjoying the show even if I look grumpy, and I do in the photos. Like, I look grumpy, but there was a moment in that show where I was thoroughly but quietly enjoying myself, like, that's right. That's right. And rip the dude who was bullying me, a new one. Please do. Sometimes I'm a little uncomfortable in front of my own lens, despite growing up in everyone else's lens. That's the thing. When I was growing up, I was constantly the subject of photos. Like, people would just randomly want to like make photo shoots. Imagine you're my father, who is a detective, and you know not to trust these dudes, but you also don't, you also know that there are opportunities, or that a really beautiful set of photos of your daughter is something that is going to stay with you for the rest of your life. And those photos have. Right. So I should, if there would be a cool time to like post some of those photos, but I was always in front of the lens, always. Right. I was always subject to it and I was comfortable with it. And then I lost comfort with it. There's a full like a decade of my life with almost no photos of me. And then, when I started to see that I was healing and sort of like learning to look at myself again, I started just taking a ton of them because I didn't want to forget, because it helped me. Being sick during that time helped me learn what you can lose, right? It's that, we lost Catherine O'Hara recently, And there was that scene in Schitt's Creek where she's like, take those photos of your boobies, right? Like she's saying that because you want to be able to look back and say, dear God, I was a beautiful thing, right? And I was. And I feel sad about that now. But I will say that part of being placed in front of everyone's cameras, right, growing up meant that I have maybe more documentation than other people did. So after this show, that I wore an inverted cat eye. I wore an inverted cat eye to this show, and I wore that several times. I intend to bring it back. I'm just not going to let it be like as gritty and grimy. Just trust me. The reverse cat eye, that's happening again. But we closed out that night at Barbarella's. So if you aren't familiar with Orlando culture, Barbarella's goes back so far. I was going to Barbarella's in the 90s, right? And it was downtown. It was downtown Orlando, whereas now it's kind of a movable feast, right? It was downtown. And that was, we were going to Barbarella's during the time of a lot of the tail end of these of the heyday of these bands. That's what I'm trying to get at. But at the time, Barbarella's was still in the warehouse district of Orlando. And I believe this was the night when Best and I decided that our song was, this is our song. Our song is Urban Heat's cover. Okay, Urban Heat's cover of Goodbye Horses. Because that's what we did when we left the show. We went to the after party at Barbarella's, and that's when I caught a video of Best dancing to this song. That's our song. Very specific. And there's a video of her dancing out on the dance floor. And I think there's something, about me that is evident in this video as I'm looking at this video of her, and that is, if I love you, you will know. Yeah, if I love you, you will know. And if I ever turn my back on you, that's because I had to, not because I wanted to. There aren't a lot of people where that's the case, right? But you got to do the most. But yeah, I'm looking at this video. It's specifically the Urban Heat cover. And so in retrospect, like looking back at the show from that night, what I can say is maybe the real sort of rock star that night was a woman who already hated DeSantis, who got a degree at the same undergraduate, university that I did, who is also a writer, also just a very different person. But I can see, like, when I look at this video, just how much I love her. So here's one thing that we will end this on, because it's like one of the longest episodes ever, after I tell you this bit. I think something that is texture to know about me is that I'm going to, like, now the music is getting serious. I'm going to say this. The other podcast I'm recording, which as soon as I hang up this one, I'm going to start recording the other one. The trauma it's intense. I'm going to say that as somebody who has been surrounded by other people with a lot of trauma. My trauma is intense. Anybody who's seen what I'm like when I'm like super anxious, and they know, or they see me when I don't feel safe, they don't know what happened, because it's not the kind of thing you just run around telling people all of the details of. I have in the past tended to focus on very specific details without going into the rest of it, because it's like I'm dying. I was always just dying to heal, but also not wanting to say the worst parts of it, for a lot of reasons. But so when I was 14 years old, it's probably 89 at this point, maybe 88, probably 89 at this point. So my father was married to an awful woman. And we lived with her for maybe about 2 years-ish, maybe 2.5 years-ish. She was awful. I mean, I could say a lot. This isn't that podcast. What I'll say though is that it was truly awful. And it wasn't just her, it was also the kinds of things the judicial powers that be demanded I do for a case that I was trying to prosecute an abuser for, right? And they just put me through more. It's just really awful. And to some degree, I look back and I want to say, don't do that. You don't have to prove this. Don't do that. But I also know that if I said, don't do the 2 years of battles that you're about to do because you're only making it worse for yourself, I was the kind of little girl that would look at you and say, but what happens if there are others? That's what I was like. I really was like that. I was also the daughter of a detective, as I've mentioned tons of times. I just had a different idea of how that process worked, because in my young mind, in my little girl mind, if I just did the things that I was supposed to do, at the very least, an abuser would be revealed. And I also knew at the very young age of 13, yeah, the very young age of 13, when a lot of this was, in full swing, I knew the other choice was, okay, I will let them say that I'm a liar. I'm not, right? I make it a point to not lie because it doesn't make sense to me. So I made a lot of choices, and I went through even more abuse that I sort of chose to. This is a part of me that I refer to as more weight. So if you've ever read the bit about Giles Corey in the Salem witch trials, he's the last person. He's the last person to be, or if not the last, maybe one last, to be killed, to be executed for witchcraft. And the way that they did that, because he was a man, was they would put heavy rocks on him, and it would be like this thing where they're like slowly crushing him to death. And so they're just adding stones. And they're like, so are you going to admit to it now? And Giles Corey was just like, more weight. And it's a way to say, fuck you, more weight, because I'm not backing down. That's what I was like as a 13-year-old. Like, what? So, but the part of this story where it's like, oh, you're like, oh, that sounds awful. Well, the redemption arc of this is where I come out of this scenario. They put me back in my mother's house. I'm not happy about it. And so what do? I don't have any friends at this point, except my good friend, my best friend of 45 years. But we went through a period where we weren't talking because of the things that my stepmother did, yada, yada. What I would do was go, like, I would be like, please, can I go to the mall? At the time, the mall was a place where they had giant music stores, right? And I would walk into the music stores, and I would walk down the aisles of like the tapes and just judge by the art. I didn't know anything about genres. When you are out of life for 2 full years, when you return, it has this weird sensation of, oh, what's a cell phone? That sort of experience, like somebody who goes to prison and they come out and they're like, what are these gadgets, right? And this strange feeling of having been out of space and time. But I also grew up in the backwoods, right? So there's like a weird bit, at that age for me. And so I would just go into these stores. I didn't know what progressive, I didn't know. And so I came at music from an angle that was not about genre, that was not even really about subculture, because at first I had no subculture to know about in order to connect. Like, if I'm like, ooh, I love The Cure. I did. Oh man, Disintegration, favorite album. To me, a perfect album, period. I don't want to hear it. Perfect. um, like, wow, this is just sort of the stuff that's working in my brain after all the trauma I've been through. Um, but I would choose based on art. I would choose based on the album art. It becomes clear as to why I found myself, with a graphic designer at one point, right? I would walk down, I would decide based on the art what I felt it was representing. Like, what is the artist like trying to tell me about this band? But I didn't quite think of it that way, right? Like, at that time, I wasn't seeing that. I wasn't like, oh, this is graphic art. It was just me like showing up at the store to walk through the tapes and to just look at the album covers. I think a lot of us, we talk about, look, we know it's heavy metal when we can't read the font, stuff like that. But that's what I did. I would just walk through, and I spent a fair amount of time just pulling like every different kind of electronic sound possible. And I think I was like a lot of other people, my age. I was like a lot of other people my age that's like fully involved with new wave and growing a growing sense of dark wave sounds. But what I didn't have was an entry from subculture. I was doing this alone. I mean, I just want to make sure that that is known. I was doing this alone. And so it was kind of like, why are you choosing this tape? What is your method? And I would be the equivalent of vibes only. I didn't know, like, you can say, oh, beep, this is new wave. I'm like, okay, is that where they like is that like the Kaja Gugu? And oh, yeah, okay. I think I can categorize that sound. Here's some New Order. Oh my God, I lost my mind over that. But that's what I would do. And so I hope that makes me make a little bit better sense. That's why I don't lead with genre. I don't lead with genre because that's not the way that I entered into the world of exploring music. I mean, my father is a guitar player. We would sing Beatles and Beatles, Dylan, Van Morrison. We would sing all these songs, Cat Stevens, all those songs, right? My father also loved anti-war protest songs. Like, he loved that stuff. But here I was, like, pulling something up with somebody wearing what I now understand is something like a harness, right? And I just didn't look at it like that. I never came at music from a genre perspective, and this is why, to some degree, I'm uneducated on genres, but I'm not uneducated on sound, right? So that's what I was like, and so I hope that all the context that I've added in this particular episode can demonstrate to you the why growing up here, and then also exploring music in the way that I did. Like, if I plucked you out of our culture, stole you up out of your culture, out of our culture, and I set you someplace for 2 years, but better make it 5 years because those 2 years would be super foundational. And I set you off on the side and you stepped in and I was like, yeah, this is my new favorite album. And you'd be like, who? Who did that? And then I tell you who, because you don't even know that band exists. You have no concept. At this point, like, I'd remember being down at the beach when Beastie Boys were playing, and probably something like 87. I was like, what is this? And somebody's like, it's Beast something. I'm like, that doesn't sound like a beast, right? I just remember something like a conversation of that nature, but I wasn't really allowed to dive into music on my own. Everything that my stepmother and stepsisters sort of allowed me to do was really what they did, right? So I was listening to Paula Abdul when I was like living with them. I liked Paula Abdul. I do. I still do. I still like those songs. That's just not, I just wouldn't say that was what would later go on to define me. I was far too depressed. I had ideation, my first bout with ideation and some awful stuff was 13. Yeah, I think it was 13. Yeah, started when I was young. But music then became my way to survive and a way to redefine myself. It's just that I'm not going to behave around music in the ways I think people expect me to. They think that somebody who's so deeply into music in the way that I am should know genres, should know all, and I just don't operate from that standpoint. But some of that has to do with the way that I had to discover music completely alone, not understanding genre, picking based on album art, and then just going from there. So a band like Ministry that switched from that sound, the more new wavy, dark wavy sound into like NWO and the harder stuff that they did later. Yeah, that's part of that divide. It's like, how old were you? How old were you when Ministry switched over? How about that? How about that? How old were you? How about we use that as a generational divide? How old were you when Ministry switched from, 12-inch singles to like, the NWO sound that they would like? How old were you? And that's where the divide is. Because if you were old enough to get used to early Ministry, that might be why you're a little bit resistant to, a little bit resistant to Jourgensen's desire to just have nothing to do with his earlier catalog. And I think he did do a tour, or they did do a tour maybe in 2025 where they played some of that stuff, right? But not the tour I was at in 2024. Not that one. Boo. But I just, Al Jorgensen's obviously never going to listen to this, obviously. But if he ever did, what I would say is, hey, thank you so much for creating the heavier sound, despite my love for the earlier stuff, right? Despite my love for that, thank you for NWO. Thank you for that, because I really needed it in that AV class when I was just an angry girl trying to work through trauma by using music she didn't understand in terms of genre, subculture, just went directly vibes and sound, period. Completely divorced for quite some time from the concept of subculture, right? That's what it was like for me. That's what it was like. It was just about sound and figuring it out. But it also felt really good to remember, hey, this was music that I listened to that was unexpected. And now here I am in a room finally getting to see this band play live, and he's telling the dude that's been fucking with my life for years to fuck off. As they say, you know who your people are when you hate the same people. Bye.